morning, kids. Mr. Bullens here. We have spent quite a bit of time talking about aquatic biomes, and we rounded out our week last week, finishing up our Google Docs, writing about our aquatic biomes. And this week, we're going to be focusing on terrestrial biomes. Now, we know from last week that aquatic biomes are those that have to do with water. And now we're moving on to land. So the terrestrial biomes are all of the biomes that we might find on land, because terrestrial means, it's a vocabulary word, means having to do with land, So let's go ahead and dive on into our terrestrial biomes. And it looks like we're starting off with grasslands. The name of this biome, grasslands, is pretty obvious once you start staring around in the grasslands. You're going to realize pretty quickly that the main plant life that you find in grasslands are grasses. And again, it perfectly describes the area that you're in. Grasslands. Again, the most important plants here are grasses. That kind of reminds me of marshes, where the most abundant plant life are grasses and marshes. Now, does that mean there are no bushes and no trees in grasslands? No, that's not what that means. It just means it's the most abundant plant life. And so we have different grasslands that we'll talk about. We'll talk about the grasslands that you might find in the United States. We're going to lump savannas in there as well that you might find in Africa. But both are considered grasslands because the major plant life is grass. In North America, which is where we live, we don't call it the savanna. We don't call it the grasslands. We typically call it the prairie. The prairie. You might see that down here, the prairie. And it wouldn't be a shock to find prairie dogs in grasslands. That would be a place that they might live. And again, this area is great for farming in the middle of the United States, in the prairies. And so that's something you need to think about. Now, when we used to talk about a lot of our abiotic factors, in our aquatic biomes, we typically said the sun, the soil, and the temperature varied. That was one of our words that we used last week a lot, was varied. It means it changes a lot. However, in order to have this much grass grow, your soil has to be very good soil. Otherwise, this many plants could not survive. So now we are moving into a descriptor of abiotic factors. So now I might start something off by saying, hey, the soil in this area is very good for producers. And then you could start kind of crossing things off in your mind, because once I've mentioned that, you're thinking, well, wait a minute. When we talked about most of the aquatic areas, we said that the soil varied. So he's probably not talking about that. Maybe if you're talking about an estuary, the soil there is very good. But then I start saying the main plant life is grasses, and you're thinking, okay, maybe a marsh. But then I start saying it's terrestrial, and you start to say, okay, I'm really starting to understand which area I'm in. Temperatures in this biome, here's that word again, vary greatly between summer and winter. The summers are very hot and the winters are very cold. Notice that we're getting a little bit more specific than we normally are. Rain in the temperate grasslands and the prairies usually occurs in the late spring and early summer. We're kind of used to that. The yearly average is about 20 to 35 inches. Now all of a sudden you realize we're starting to add a little bit more facts. Now I've actually given you a very specific amount of precipitation. So we're talking about water in this area. So when we're talking sun, soil, water, and temperature, I've given you very specific temperatures at specific times of the year. I've given you specifics about the soil. I've given you specifics about how much water they get per year. And now we're starting to understand a little bit more about this area. And it does get a little bit more precise when we're in our terrestrial biomes. The yearly average is about 20 to 35 inches, but much of it falls as snow in the wintertime. The grasslands are pretty much covered in snow in the wintertime. This down here is pretty important. Fire happens very often in the grasslands. That's why we need those herbivores out there eating the grass. Lightning or even human activity, because I know one of the wildfires in California was set by a gender reveal party. They were trying to say if they were having a boy or a girl, and they ended up setting a fire, and then it torched a lot of land, which is very bad. So humans and lightning set fires. If we don't have those herbivores eating these producers and keeping that carrying capacity a little lower, we're going to have more of that than normal. Some of that is very normal, and there are some plants we'll get to later that only are able to spread their seeds when there is fire. So sometimes fire is a very natural occurring thing, and sometimes, obviously, when humans set it off, it is not. Grassland plant life. Now we've moved into biotic factors. Grasses dominate the temperate grasslands. Trees, large shrubs are found, but they're not everywhere. There are many different species of grass. Now, don't go writing down things like wild oats and buffalo grass. You don't need to know all that. It's grass, the end. It's just some extra facts in there for you to kind of see. Animals eat the grass, obviously. And here's something extremely important about grass. Grass is able to grow back because the roots are underground. And even if like an animal comes by and chews them off all the way to the very like just top of the ground, they're going to grow back. Their stems and buds are underground. So that's an adaptation that the grasses have. Even when fires burn through, the grasses are able to adapt to that and grow back. Trees and bushes aren't as hardy as the grasses are. So it's kind of neat how the way that grasses have adapted to grow back when the plants are eaten all the way to the ground by the herbivores, or when they're burned all the way to the ground, they're able to grow back, which is pretty amazing because they have underground growth that ends up pushing them up. Do you need to know all about wildflowers and everything else on this? No, you don't have to know all about all of this. These are just facts that you may go back in and put into your Google Doc if you need to. I would recommend looking through this. Grassland animals. So we're talking the prairie. We're still in North America. All of the grassland animals share this lack of shelter from your predators. There aren't many trees. There aren't many bushes. So what would you do if you were to be in that area? Like, one thing would be to live underground like the prairie dogs. The other things would be you need to be very fast. So think about deer. Deer are super fast. So you have to have very specific adaptations. Like, deer eat a lot of grass. That's their main source of food. They have to be very fast to get away from any predators, and they have that as well. They're very skittish. They have good ears. So it depends on which animal you are, but you have to be adapted to live in the grassland. We talk about ungulates here. Ungulates are mammals with hooves, like horse or deer. Their long legs help them run and escape, and their feet are help them as well because it helps them dig into to the soil to give them more traction when they are trying to run fast. And that's important. But look at these prairie dogs in the background. I think there's a video attached on here as well, and that would be a very important thing. Also, good eyesight. You need to be able to hear well. But it's important that you understand that the grassland animals do have a lack of shelter, but they have a ton of food. I mean, there's definitely no lack of food for the grassland animals. You can watch this at home, and you can watch that at home and that at home. My goodness gracious, I attached a lot. Grassland anchor chart notes. This is pretty much what I would have written down in class on the anchor chart when we're all here. Kind of weird when we're doing it AB day. It's kind of hard to write down notes if you're not here, so I have them on here for you. The most important plant life is grass. This is basically a summary of what we just talked about. Climate. You have two main seasons, summer and winter. Okay, and I mean, you could say that they have spring and fall, but it's super hot, and then it gets super cold, and there's lots of snow. So you have summer and winter. The soil is amazing. It grows a lot of grass, so it obviously has to be. So when you're talking about a grassland, the first thing that should come to mind is, that's right, grasses. Many, many, many herbivores live there. Again, you talk about the adaptations of the deers. They're very, very fast. You talk about the adaptations of the prairie dogs is they live underground. That also helps them during fires. If there's a fire, they don't have to run away and get out of the burning grass. They just go underground and deal with it that way. And so I think that that's very important for you to remember as well. So we have wrapped up part 1 of grasslands. We've wrapped up the ones that you might find here in North America that we call the prairie. So we're going to have another video. It's going to talk about something called the savanna, and that is a grassland that you might find in Africa. And I think you might be a little bit more familiar with that one, although many of the facts are going to be very similar. Some of the things are going to change as well, and we'll be able to compare and contrast those. All right, we'll see you in the next one. Smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe.